At 50 years old, Kevin Garnett is finally talking about the 5 investments that actually shaped his fortune, and the story does not start with a smart deal. It starts with a theft. For years, one of the most physically dominant players in NBA history let another man control almost every dollar he made outside his paycheck. And that man allegedly walked away with $77 million of it. Most breakdowns on athlete wealth skip straight to the wins, the courtside deals, the equity stakes, the exit numbers that make for a clean highlight reel. Garnett's story does not work that way. You cannot understand why he owns what he owns today without understanding what got taken from him first. Understanding how Garnett rebuilt from that hole is the only way to understand the 5 bets he actually trusts today. Let's get into it. Garnett earned more than $334 million in NBA salary across 21 seasons, one of the largest career hauls in league history. A 5-year, $100 million extension with Minnesota in 2003. A 3-year deal in Boston worth roughly $60 million with bonuses. Adidas signed him to a reported lifetime shoe deal in 2003, a rare structure that most athletes never get offered. On paper, Garnett did everything right. He had the max contracts, the shoe deal, the community profile, the I promise style commitment to give back at home. But max contracts and shoe deals are still just salary and fees. They do not make you an owner. They make you a very well-paid employee, and Garnett, like most players of his era, needed somewhere to put that money so it could grow into something bigger than a paycheck. That is where Hammer Holdings comes in, and it is the part of this story most people skip past to get to the highlight reel. Garnett set up Hammer Holdings as his personal investment vehicle, and he handed 50% of it to a wealth manager named Charles Banks IV. The arrangement sounds reasonable on the surface. Banks would match Garnett's contributions dollar for dollar, and they would split the profits. In practice, according to a lawsuit Garnett later filed, Banks used Hammer Holdings as his own personal account. Withdrawals for credit cards, withdrawals for mortgages, withdrawals for private jets and family vacations that had nothing to do with Garnett. At one point, Garnett asked for $40,000 of his own money and was denied because Banks claimed the finances were tight. Days after Banks had allegedly pulled $500,000 out for himself. By the time it unraveled, Garnett said the total damage came to $77 million, and he later sued his accountant for allegedly knowing about it and staying silent. Banks was already serving a federal prison sentence for doing something similar to Tim Duncan. 2 of the most decorated players of their generation robbed by the same advisor in 2 separate schemes that together topped $100 million. That is the wound underneath everything Garnett built afterward, and it explains why every investment on this list looks so different from the passive, hand it off, trust the manager model that nearly wiped him out. Garnett stopped looking for someone to manage his money for him. He started building things he could see, touch, and personally control. Most athletes who get burned this badly by an advisor quietly retreat into index funds and never take a real business risk again. Garnett did the opposite. He kept investing, but he changed who was allowed to hold the keys. And that single change is the thread connecting everything that follows. The first one is real estate, and it is the least flashy but the most consistent piece of the portfolio. In 2003, Garnett bought a lakeside estate in Orono, Minnesota for roughly $6.45 million. Years later, he sold it for a reported $9 million, a record sale price for that market at the time. That is not a headline-grabbing multiple, but it is a straightforward, unglamorous return on an asset he could inspect himself. One that did not depend on trusting a business partner with the keys. He bought land on the Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu for around $6.4 million and eventually built out an 11,000 square foot property there, which he sold years later for $16 million. Beyond the personal properties, Garnett moved into commercial and multifamily real estate in Greenville, South Carolina, his hometown region, and in Minneapolis, the city that made him a star. Real estate does not compound the way equity in a breakout startup can, but it also does not require Garnett to hand 50% control to anyone. After Hammer Holdings, that mattered more to him than any theoretical upside. Every property on this list is something Garnett could physically walk through, price against comparable sales himself, and sell on his own timeline, which is precisely the kind of control that Hammer Holdings never gave him. The second one almost did not happen. And it tells you Garnett actually understood the athlete equity playbook years before most people gave him credit for it. In December of 2011, the same year LeBron James bought into Liverpool through Fenway Sports Group, Garnett agreed to buy a minority stake in AS Roma, the Italian soccer club that had just been purchased by an American ownership group. It was structured almost identically to the Liverpool deal, a small equity slice in exchange for global visibility. Then the NBA stepped in and blocked it. The league's concern was straightforward. One of Roma's principal owners was James Pallotta, who also held a stake in the Boston Celtics, and letting a Celtics player buy equity from a team executive raised the kind of conflict of interest questions the league did not want to touch, especially around salary cap workarounds. Garnett never got his piece of Roma. It is a rare example of an athlete trying to run the exact move that made LeBron tens of millions of dollars and getting told no for reasons that had nothing to do with the deal itself. The lesson Garnett took from it was not to avoid equity. It was that equity tied to someone else's team, someone else's league approval, and someone else's structure will always carry risk he cannot control. So his next moves were about ownership he built himself, in companies where nobody but Garnett could tell him no. The third investment is Big Ticket Sports, the company Garnett founded after retiring in 2016, and it is the closest thing on this list to LeBron building Spring Hill instead of just cashing endorsement checks. Big Ticket Sports is not Garnett renting out his face for a fee. It is an operating company that owns event properties outright. It acquired the Hoop It Up 3-on-3 basketball tour, an event series with millions of participants dating back to 1989, and the Kick It Soccer tour alongside it. That is the difference between an endorsement and this kind of deal. A shoe company pays Garnett to wear a logo, and the logo's value stays with the shoe company forever. Big Ticket Sports lets Garnett own the asset, run the calendar, and keep the upside as those properties grow. The same structural shift LeBron made when he stopped taking flat endorsement fees and started taking equity in beats. Garnett is listed as the company's founder rather than a paid ambassador attached to someone else's brand, which means every new event the company acquires adds directly to something he owns outright instead of padding a stranger's balance sheet. The fourth investment runs through that same company into a completely different industry: esports and digital sports media. In 2019, Big Ticket Sports invested in Triumph Esports, an organization built around Rivalcade, a competitive esports event company, and Triumph Gaming, a professional esports team fielding rosters in games like Apex Legends and Overwatch. Garnett joined a growing list of NBA names moving into the space, alongside Michael Jordan, Shaquille O'Neal, and Steph Curry. But the framing mattered. This was not Garnett as a spokesperson for a gaming brand. It was Big Ticket Sports as an investor sitting inside an industry Garnett correctly bet would keep growing long after his own playing career ended. He followed that with a stake in Gaming Society, a gamified sports media platform, extending the same bet that attention and competition were migrating toward formats far outside a traditional basketball broadcast. Neither of those investments generated headlines the way a soccer club stake or a headphone company would. But that was never the point. Garnett was not chasing attention with this money anymore. He was chasing ownership in industries that had room to grow for decades, quietly, through a company he actually ran. The fifth investment is the one that looks most like the Blaze Pizza structure from the LeBron playbook, stacking equity, advisory input, and brand promotion into a single deal instead of collecting one flat check. In 2023, Big Ticket Sports partnered with Pro League Network to launch Star 33T, a 3-on-3 professional streetball league built for short-form digital content and legal sports wagering audiences. As part of the deal, Big Ticket Sports became an investor in Pro League Network itself, the parent company backed by seed funding from eBird Capital and IA Ventures. Not just a fee for showing up on launch day. Garnett also signed on as a strategic advisor on the league's direction, meaning he is paid to help make the thing more valuable while his equity stake rises alongside it. It is the same loop LeBron ran with Blaze. Ownership, advisory fees, and brand promotion all pointed at the same asset instead of three separate paychecks going nowhere. The difference is that Garnett arrived at that structure from the opposite direction. LeBron built toward equity because he saw how much upside a flat fee left on the table. Garnett built toward equity because a version of trust without oversight had already cost him tens of millions, and he was not going to let that happen twice. Put those five together and you can see the actual shape of Garnett's post-NBA money system. Real estate for stability he personally controls. The blocked Roma deal as proof he understood the athlete equity model early, even when the league would not let him use it. Big-ticket sports as the operating company that turns him from spokesperson into owner. Triumph Esports and Gaming Society as a bet on where audiences and competition were heading next. And Strar 33T as the fully stacked deal that combines equity, advisory pay, and promotion the way Blaze Pizza did for LeBron. None of these are moonshot bets. None of them depend on trusting a single manager with unchecked access to his accounts ever again. Each one keeps Garnett close enough to the operations that he would notice long before a number quietly disappeared. Garnett's net worth today sits at roughly $120 million by most public estimates, a fraction of the $334 million he earned on the court, and noticeably lower than it would have been without the Hammer Holdings losses. That gap is the whole story here. It is not a tale of a genius investor who never made a mistake. It is a tale of an athlete who got taken for tens of millions of dollars by someone he trusted completely and then had to rebuild an entire philosophy of ownership from that low point. Most people who lose money that way never talk about it publicly again, let alone let it shape a business strategy for the next decade. Garnett did both. Every deal on this list, the properties he can walk through himself, the operating company that owns its own events, the esports bets, the stacked Strar 33 structure, exists because Garnett decided he would rather build something smaller that he actually controls than hand a bigger number to someone else and hope they stay honest. That is the real top five. Not the biggest checks, but the 5 moves that finally put Kevin Garnett back in control of his own money. At 50, with more than 2 decades of hindsight and one very expensive lesson behind him, Garnett is not chasing the biggest possible number anymore. He is protecting his ability to see exactly where every dollar sits and who has their hands on it. If you want more breakdowns on how athletes build, lose, and rebuild their fortunes once the paychecks stop coming, hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one.